We spend much of our lives trying to be understood. It begins innocently, the child who wants his parents to see him, the student who wants her ideas to be heard, the lover who wants to be known completely. It feels natural to explain ourselves, to translate our hearts into words. But at some point in the journey of awakening, a strange thing happens. The explanations stop working. The words that once connected you now seem to separate you. The more you speak, the less they understand. The more you try to show them what you see, the deeper they retreat into their familiar dream. That's when you realize you have crossed an invisible threshold. You have woken up in a world where many are still asleep. Alan Watts called life a dream, not as a poetic exaggeration, but as a diagnosis of perception. Most people are trapped in a trance of concepts. Identities, fears, expectations, a collective hypnosis where the mind confuses symbols for reality. You were there once too. You played by its rules, believed in its hierarchies, argued within its illusions, but something cracked. Maybe it was a heartbreak, a collapse, a sudden stillness in the middle of noise. For a moment the curtain lifted. You saw that most of what people call reality is just agreement, a script passed from generation to generation. And when you stopped agreeing, you began to awaken. The problem is, the dream doesn't like being questioned. When you step out of it, the sleepers feel threatened. They look at you not with curiosity, but with suspicion. They call you strange, distant, arrogant, or changed. They demand you explain yourself, why you don't chase what they chase, why you no longer defend what they defend, why you seem calm while they panic. They want you to justify your peace. But how can you explain sunlight to someone who insists the night is eternal? To explain yourself to those trapped in the dream is to waste the air of awakening. Not because they are inferior, they are not, but because understanding cannot be forced. A dream cannot be reasoned out of existence. It must dissolve from within. And until they begin to question it themselves, your truth will sound like madness. You may be tempted to try anyway, out of compassion, out of love. You want to help them see. You think if you just choose the right words, the right metaphor, they'll wake up too. But it never works like that. The awakening is not contagious through language. It happens through silence, through the slow erosion of illusion inside one's own heart. Your explanations are like knocking on a mirror. You see your reflection, but the sound doesn't go through. So you begin to learn a higher form of compassion, to stop convincing and start radiating. You become the quiet presence that no longer argues, no longer persuades. You realize that your task is not to wake others up, but to stay awake yourself. The rest follows its natural rhythm. When Watts spoke about the dream, he didn't mean that life was meaningless. He meant that most of us mistake the shadow for the source. We live inside a movie of thoughts, missing the simple aliveness beneath. To awaken is not to escape life, but to finally live it directly, without the filter of fear and judgment. And once you taste that clarity, the noise of explanation feels absurd. How could words ever capture this freedom? How could logic explain love? This is the silent revolution of awareness, to stop defending your light to those who prefer darkness, to let go of the impulse to be understood, and instead be real. Every attempt to explain yourself to those still dreaming drags you partly back into their sleep. They speak in the language of control and validation, while you have begun to speak in the language of presence and acceptance. Two different frequencies, two different worlds. It's painful at first. You will lose people. You will feel misunderstood, judged, sometimes even mocked. But that too is part of awakening. The loneliness of clarity. Every birth happens in solitude. The caterpillar doesn't explain metamorphosis to the other caterpillars. It simply becomes the butterfly. And those who are ready will notice the wings. There's a deeper freedom waiting when you stop needing others to agree with your reality. You start walking lighter. You stop performing. You start listening again. Not to opinions, but to the quiet pulse of being. You find that truth doesn't need to be announced. It vibrates in silence. It expresses itself in how you move, how you breathe, how you meet the world. Watts once said that trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The very act of explanation is the trap. The more you explain, the more you fix yourself into an identity. And awakening is the opposite of that. It's the loosening of all masks. The deeper you awaken, the less you can describe yourself, because you as a separate entity begins to dissolve. You become a process, a wave in the ocean, not a thing to be justified. So stop explaining yourself. Let those who don't understand think what they will. Let them talk. Let them project. Their dream will one day crumble under its own weight, and when it does, they might remember the calmness in your eyes, the peace you carried without words. That memory will be your real explanation, the one that doesn't need language. You escaped the dream not to prove your enlightenment, but to remember your essence. And the greatest respect you can offer those still sleeping is patience. You do not shake them awake. You simply shine so steadily that their eyes begin to open on their own. In the end, understanding is not a transaction of ideas, but a resonance of being. Those who are ready will feel it. Those who aren't will call it nonsense, and that's fine. The truth doesn't demand applause. It only asks that you live it. So stop explaining. Breathe, be, walk softly through their dream, knowing you are awake within it. There is no need to convert, convince, or conform. The silence of your presence is already enough. And that silence, that quiet clarity, is the only language the soul truly understands. There comes a point in every awakening when you realize that peace is not something you achieve. It's something that remains when the noise stops. Yet the world keeps pulling you back into conversations that require noise, justifications, debates, explanations, endless attempts to translate silence into words. You try to meet people where they are, but every sentence feels like a betrayal of what you know. The truth one seeks refuses to fit back into the frame of argument. You begin to see the subtle violence, hidden in the need to be understood. Every time you explain yourself, you abandon the stillness that birthed your clarity. It's not arrogance. It's the recognition that peace and persuasion cannot coexist. To explain your freedom to someone who still believes the cage is necessary is to return voluntarily to confinement. In the dream world, everyone is busy defending an image. They argue not to understand, but to preserve their illusions. You used to do the same, insisting that your opinions were truth, that your perspective was reality. But awakening dismantles that game. You no longer need to win, you only need to see. And that simple act of seeing changes everything. When you encounter those still inside the dream, they sense your difference before they understand it. They interpret your calm as distance, your detachment as indifference, your silence as superiority. They measure your awakening against the metrics of the dream: success, conformity, attention, and you realize how impossible it is to communicate depth to someone still counting the ripples on the surface. At first, this realization hurts. You want to be seen, you want to share what you found, the freedom of letting go, the relief of no longer pretending. You speak from love, not pride. Yet love expressed to a sleeping mind sounds like rebellion. They ask, "What happened to you?" You say, "I woke up." They answer, "You've changed." And in that moment you understand that's exactly the point. Eventually you stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You start to live as a quiet example rather than a loud explanation. You become a mirror that reflects without distortion. Some will look into that mirror and see beauty. Others will see offense. The difference is not in the mirror, but in the eyes that look into it. There's a strange peace in realizing you don't have to defend your evolution. The tree doesn't explain to the seed what it feels like to touch sunlight. The river doesn't justify its flow to the stone. Growth has its own language, and those ready to hear it will listen without words. Still, it's natural to grieve the distance that awakening creates. You remember the laughter you shared with people who no longer understand you, the way you once belonged to their rhythm. Now your silence feels like exile, but it isn't exile. It's clarity. You are not apart from them. You are simply awake within the same dream. You walk through their world as a lucid dreamer, aware that none of it truly binds you. That's not loneliness. That's freedom misunderstood. Many people mistake awakening for superiority. They think enlightenment means better than, but real awakening is humbling. It dissolves the illusion of being special. It shows you that you were never separate in the first place. You see the dream for what it is, not evil, not false, but temporary. The sleepers are not wrong. They're simply unaware, and compassion becomes your natural response. Alan Watts often reminded his listeners that trying to change people is like trying to straighten the waves of the sea. The ocean doesn't need correction, only understanding. Likewise, those still trapped in the dream don't need correction. They need presence. You can't force anyone to awaken. You can only invite them by living your truth quietly. This quietness is not passive, it's powerful in its stillness. When you stop explaining yourself, your energy stops leaking into arguments that go nowhere. It gathers within you, becoming luminous. People feel it, even if they can't name it. Your peace begins to speak in the only language the soul understands, vibration. And one day, someone will look at you differently. They won't ask you to explain why you are so calm, or why nothing seems to disturb you anymore. They will simply feel that peace and begin to question their own restlessness. That is how awakening spreads, not through persuasion, but through resonance. To stop explaining yourself is to respect the sacred boundary between knowing and telling. The dream needs storytellers, awakening needs witnesses. When you step into the role of witness, you stop acting in the drama. You observe the dream with compassion, aware that every soul will awaken in its own timing. Of course, the world will still tempt you. There will be accusations, misinterpretations, emotional storms. People will call you detached when you're simply grounded. They will call you strange when you're simply free. But you will learn to smile gently, because you see their reactions not as insults, but as echoes of the dream. You remember how loud that dream used to feel inside your own head. The real mastery is not in cutting yourself off from others, but in staying open without being pulled back in, to love them without joining their confusion, to listen without losing yourself, to care without explaining. It is a delicate art, the art of compassionate detachment. The paradox is that once you stop explaining, your presence begins to teach more powerfully than your words ever could. People start to notice not what you say, but how you live. They watch how you face conflict without defensiveness, how you remain calm amid chaos, how you carry a lightness that seems immune to the world's heaviness. You become a living reminder that peace is possible. Watts said, "You don't look out there for God, something in the sky, you look within." When you stop explaining yourself, that's exactly what happens. You stop projecting truth outward, and it settles within. You realize you were never trying to convince others. You were trying to convince yourself. Now that you've seen, there's no one left to persuade. The dream continues around you. People chasing shadows, arguing about meaning, defending illusions. You walk among them not with judgment, but with gratitude. You know how fragile peace can be. You protect it like a flame in the wind, and each time you refuse to explain yourself, that flame grows steadier. In time, the silence that once felt uncomfortable becomes your home. It holds everything you used to try to say. Every truth you struggled to explain is now resting there radiant and wordless. You've learned the highest form of communication, being, and in that being you find what Watts meant all along. The dream was never the enemy. It was just the place where you learned to wake up. There is a peace that arrives only after the exhaustion of trying. After all the debates, the explanations, the careful words that fell on deaf ears, you finally fall silent, not out of pride, but from understanding. You realize that truth does not argue. It simply is. The greatest awakening is not an explosion, but a soft surrender. You stop needing to fix the dream or wake the sleepers. You accept that everyone moves at the pace of their own seeing. What you once called loneliness becomes spaciousness. What you once called distance becomes compassion. You start to see that silence isn't the absence of connection, it's the presence of something deeper than words. Alan Watts used to say that awakening is not about getting somewhere new, but realizing you were never anywhere else. You were the dreamer, the dream, and the one watching both. The awakening wasn't an escape, it was a homecoming. You didn't leave the dream behind, you learned to walk through it consciously. Now you look around and see that nothing really changed. The world keeps spinning, people still chase illusions, conversations still circle the same emptiness. But inside you the gravity has shifted. You are no longer pulled by the need to explain, to justify, to convince. You have stepped out of the orbit of misunderstanding. And from this stillness you begin to see the sleepers differently. Not as blind, but as divine beings playing their roles. Each one will awaken when the script demands it. The anger you once felt toward them dissolves into tenderness. They are not your enemies. They are you in another scene of the same dream. You stop trying to wake them and start honoring their sleep. You bow inwardly to the mystery of their timing. There is an elegance in this surrender. You move through life like a quiet flame, clear, steady, untouchable. When others project their fears onto you, you no longer react. You see that their misunderstanding has nothing to do with you. It's simply the dream defending itself. You smile gently, not because you're indifferent, but because you finally understand. Explaining yourself once felt like a duty, as if truth required translation to be valid. Now you know truth doesn't need defenders. It needs witnesses. You've become one. You no longer seek approval for your peace. You simply live it, and that living becomes your teaching. The people who once doubted you may one day ask, quietly, how you found such stillness. You won't give them philosophy. You'll give them presence. You'll meet them where they are, not with arguments, but with listening. Because real understanding doesn't pass through words, it flows through silence. In the dream, everyone is running. From fear toward success, away from pain toward validation. You walk now, unhurried, aware that none of it is real enough to threaten what you are. You have remembered yourself as awareness itself, the clear sky in which all weather appears and disappears. And how absurd it seems now to try to explain the sky to the clouds. So you let go. You let people misinterpret you. You let them call your calmness cold, your detachment strange, your quietness weakness. None of it touches you, because you finally see that identity is the costume of the dream. You no longer need to wear it. Watts often said that trying to hold on to the self is like trying to grasp water. The tighter you clutch it, the faster it slips away. The self you used to defend, the one you explained and justified, was never real. It was a reflection, a temporary shape in the current. Now you are the current itself, flowing effortlessly through what is. To stop explaining yourself is to stop resisting life. You start to trust the rhythm. Who stays, who leaves, who understands, who doesn't. Everything becomes perfect in its incompletion. You see that awakening doesn't make you separate from humanity. It makes you tender toward it. You can finally sit among the sleepers without judgment, knowing that their dreaming is sacred too. When someone questions you now, you no longer rush to respond. You breathe, you smile, you listen. Sometimes you answer, sometimes you don't. Both are correct. You have learned the language of silence, and in that language every gesture becomes poetry. In the end, awakening is not about being right, it's about being real. And being real means standing quietly in your truth, even when no one else can see it. It means understanding that peace is not a prize. Others can give or take, it's your natural state waiting beneath the noise. So let them talk, let them misunderstand, let them stay asleep a little longer. The dream has its own beauty, and one day it too will lead them home. Your task is no longer to explain the path. It is to walk it barefoot with open eyes, carrying the lamp of awareness through the fog of illusion. When you walk this way, every misunderstanding becomes harmless. Every silence becomes full. Every encounter becomes sacred. You realize there was never anyone to convince, because no one was ever separate. The dream, the dreamers, and the awakened, all of it, one motion of consciousness. So rest now, stop explaining. You have nothing to prove, and no one to persuade. You are already what you sought to describe. The truth you were trying to express is the truth that is breathing you in this very moment. And perhaps that is the final lesson Alan Watts left us. The dream does not end when you wake up. It continues. But now you are awake within it. No explanations left. No defenses needed. Only awareness, silent and infinite. Because in the end, there is nothing to explain. There is only to be.